Look, gentlemen, just like you, I need love. That's right, I said it, love, to ease my mind. But unlike most people, you four don't need to find someone to call thine own because you've already set your sights on the princess, Rosaline, Catherine, and Maria. But with that said, just know that love don't come easy. As these witty women have no doubt already taught you about courtship, I'm sure you'll agree that it's a game of give and take. Of course, waiting a whole year for each of you to marry the love of your life will be tough. But right now, they've given you some tests to prove yourselves as worthy men. And if the only thing that keeps thee hanging on when you feel that you can't go on are the memories of those beautiful women, just cling to these precious words that my mama said to keep me hanging on. Just keep on waiting and anticipating for that soft voice to talk to thee at night and for some tender arms to hold thee tight. So remember this, my lords. Just be patient and give it time, no matter how long it takes. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I really have to get back to my show. But to answer Domain's question that he asked earlier, is there a logical reason why you can't hurry love? No, you just have to wait. In the 2002 film My Big Fat Greek Wedding, an American school teacher must jump through hoops and convert to the Greek Orthodox religion in order to prove himself worthy to his fiancée's family. In Love's Labour's Lost, the King of Navarre vows to wait a year and a day to wed the Princess of France, who is mourning the death of her father, and the king's fellow students agree to do the same to marry the women they love. All parties believe it will be worth the wait, so let's take a look at the plot. Ferdinand, King of Navarre, and his three noble lords and companions, Biron, Dumaine, and Longueville, all swear an oath not to see a woman, sleep just 3 hours a night and not to be seen yawning during the day, and fast 1 day a week for a period of 3 years while they study and seek to improve themselves. Eventually, the cynical Biron reluctantly agrees, even though he's more hesitant than the others. But just as the king declares that no woman should come into the court, the Princess of France and her entourage arrive that same day for a meeting. Meanwhile, Don Adriano de Amado, a braggadocious Spaniard who is visiting the court, sends a letter to the king telling of an affair between Costard and Jaquenetta. But even as the king sentences Costard to fast for a week with bran and water, Don Armado confesses his own love for Jaquenetta to his page Moat. Don Armado sends Jaquenetta a letter and gives Costard a remuneration to deliver it to her. When the Princess of France and her ladies arrive, they expect to speak to the king regarding the cessation of Aquitaine. However, because of the king's decree, they must set up camp outside the court in the field. When the king visits the princess, he falls in love with her, as do his lords with her ladies. Biron gives Costard a letter to deliver to the Lady Rosaline. However, Costard accidentally switches it with Don Armado's letter that was meant for Jaquenetta. Jaquenetta consults with Holofernes and Sir Nathaniel, a couple of snobbish scholars, and they conclude that the letter was written by Biron and instruct Jaquenetta to bring the letter to the king. Meanwhile, the king and his companions each hide in the study and observe one another as each one subsequently reveals his romantic feelings. After the king chastises Dumaine and Longueville for breaking their oath, Biron exposes the king, who has fallen in love with the princess. Just then, Jaquenetta and Costard enter with Biron's letter and accuse him of treason. Biron confesses to breaking the oath and explains that the only study worth making is that of love, and they all agree to renounce their vow. Arranging for Holofernes to entertain everyone later, the men disguise themselves as Muscovites and court the ladies. But the queen's clever courtier Boyet, having overheard their plans, assists the ladies in fooling the men by disguising themselves as one another. When the lords return as themselves, the ladies taunt them and expose their stunt. Once the men realize that the ladies have tricked them, they come clean and apologize. Afterwards, they have a good laugh and then watch Holofernes, Sir Nathaniel, Costard, Moat, and Don Armado present the pageant of the 9 worthies. The 4 lords and Boyet heckle the players, except for Costard, whom for some reason they praise. Don Armado and Costard almost come to blows when Costard announces mid-pageant that Jaquenetta is in fact 2 months pregnant with Don Armado's child. But their spat is interrupted when news arrives that the princess's father has died. The princess makes plans to leave at once along with her entourage, and they prepare for mourning. However, the ladies also tell the men that they must wait a year and a day in order to marry if they want to prove that their love is true. All the men vow to do so. Don Armado announces he will swear a 3-year oath to Jaquenetta and then presents the nobles with a song as the play ends. When we return, we'll look at some of the major characters in Love's Labour's Lost. All right, now let's take a look at some of the characters in Love's Labour's Lost. Frederick is the King of Navarre. He comes up with the idea for him and his 3 friends, Biron, Dumaine, and Longueville, to spend the next 3 years together studying, while at the same time sleeping very little, eating very little, and having no contact with women. What could go wrong? And while the other 3 agree to go along with this commitment, Biron is by far the most cynical and skeptical of the 3. He is also the most clever and experienced with women, romance, and courtship. However, that doesn't stop him from looking just as foolish as his fellow students when the women demonstrate that these bachelors are just no match for them. Visiting from France are the princess and her 3 attending ladies, Rosaline, Catherine, and Maria. Each of these 3 women is familiar with one of the king's students, and each one secretly likes him. Along with the ladies is Boyet, whose chief job is to attend on the princess and serve as a go-between between the men and the women. There is also Don Adriano de Armado and his trusty page boy, whose name is spelled like moth, but is pronounced moat. Don Armado is a Spanish braggart who is brought in to entertain the court, but also gets the lovely country girl Jaquenetta with child when he's not busy being outsmarted by Moat. There's also the stuck-up schoolmaster Holofernes, who likes to show off his intellect by speaking Latin and Italian, but is virtually unintelligible to anyone else. We also have Sir Nathaniel, who is a curate, and Constable Anthony Dull, who makes sure that he lives up to his name. And finally, Costard is the clown who provides much of the comic relief in the play. Like so many of Shakespeare's simple characters, he often mistakes the meaning of words. But now let's take a look at Act 1, Scene 1, where King Ferdinand reads a letter from Don Armado saying how he saw Costard consorting with Jaquenetta in the park, which is a clear violation of the king's proclamation and carries a stiff penalty. The king asks Costard, "But, sirrah, what say you to this?" And Costard replies, "Sir, I confess the wench." Ferdinand asks him, "Did you hear the proclamation?" And Costard says, "I do confess much of the hearing it, but little of the marking of it." The king explains, "It was proclaimed a year's imprisonment to be taken with a wench." But Costard's defense is, "I was taken with none, sir. I was taken with a damsel." Ferdinand says, "Well, it was proclaimed damsel." Costard counters by saying, "This was no damsel neither, sir. She was a virgin." The king clarifies, saying, "It is so very too, for it was proclaimed virgin." Costard replies, "If it were, I deny her virginity. I was taken with a maid." Ferdinand tells him, "This maid will not serve your turn, sir." But Costard, misunderstanding him again, says, "This maid will serve my term, sir." Ferdinand says, "Sir, I will pronounce your sentence. You shall fast a week with bran and water." To which Costard replies, "I had rather pray a month with mutton and porridge." When we return, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from Love's Labour's Lost. Shakespeare went with some of his tried and true plot devices in this play. First, we have the play within a play, as Holofernes, Sir Nathaniel, Don Armado, Moat, Costard, and others present the pageant of the nine worthies. This is done for comic relief right before the sad news arrives of the King of France's death. We're used to seeing this plot device in The Two Noble Kinsmen, Hamlet, Much Ado About Nothing, and The Taming of the Shrew. Next, we have a crazy restriction. In this case, the men cannot talk to women for 3 years. In Measure for Measure, adultery was considered a capital crime even among engaged couples. In The Comedy of Errors, Syracusans entering Ephesus are to be executed. In The Merchant of Venice, Portia must marry whoever opens the correct chest. And in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, suitors of King Antioch's daughter must answer a riddle or die. Another popular plot device is eavesdropping, but specifically, as I like to call it, hiding in plain sight. This means that even though there are characters on the stage overhearing other characters, they're placed in such a way that their concealment is really comical, because it would be impossible to imagine the people on whom they're eavesdropping could not easily see them doing it. This is done so that the audience can gauge their reactions and get a good laugh about the absurdity of the farce. In Love's Labour's Lost, each student eavesdrops on the next student that comes in the study. In Much Ado About Nothing, we also see Beatrice and Benedict eavesdropping on their respective friends, revealing that each one loves the other. In Twelfth Night, Sir Toby Belch, Sir Andrew, and Fabian hide in plain sight as Malvolio reads Maria's forged letter from Olivia. We also have the use of disguises and masks when the king and his cronies dress up as Muscovites and the women wear masks to cross their purposes. Disguises are also used in Much Ado About Nothing, Romeo and Juliet, Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 by Hal and Ned Poins, by Master Ford in The Merry Wives of Windsor, and in Henry VIII. Shakespeare also employed the use of sonnets in Love's Labour's Lost in order for the men to express their love to the ladies. Sonnets were becoming very popular at this time, and Shakespeare also uses them in Romeo and Juliet. And of course, we have the ever-popular misdirected letters. Costard mixes up letters from Don Armado and Barone, adding to the confusion and the comedy. But misdirected and uncommunicated letters also spoil the plans for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in Hamlet, for Romeo and Juliet, for Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and for several opponents of Henry Bolingbroke in Richard II. And by far, the most memorable scene in the play is Act 4, Scene 3, in which Barone goes to the study and admits that he's in love with Rosalind, only to be interrupted when the king shows up to confess his love for the princess. Meanwhile, Barone hides and overhears everything the king is saying. But not long after that, Longueville comes in and starts professing his love for Maria. At this point, the king is also hiding, but doesn't know that Barone is aware of him. Finally, Dumaine comes in, and Longueville must hide, while his friend starts proclaiming his love and affections for Catherine. As each man is confronted by the previous student, they all wind up admitting that they are in love. Of course, Barone is the last to admit it, but is undone when Costard and Jacquinetta show up and confront him with his own love letter to Rosalind. But what I like best about this scene is that when it comes to learning how to woo their desired ladies, rank goes out the door, and all the men listen to Barone, who is the most sophisticated lover among the four of them. I guess all really is fair in love and war. Next up, we'll delve into some of the most powerful themes that run through Love's Labour's Lost. Even though this is a bittersweet comedy, there's plenty of romantic attraction and desire on display in the play. It's obvious that the Princess of France and the King of Navarre are very attracted to each other. Barone and Rosalind have met previously, and their attraction is rekindled once again, but their sparring is very similar to that of Benedict and Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing. Longueville and Dumaine have both previously met Catherine and Maria, or at least they're aware of them. It's nice that in this play, each man is only attracted to one specific woman, and none of them wind up fighting over the same ladies. Of course, there's also the luscious country girl, Jacquinetta, who attracts both Costard and Don Armado. However, that doesn't seem to have created any problems. It's never quite clear if Costard has had a fling with the wench or was just talking with her in the park. Regardless, Don Armado has obviously slept with Jacquinetta and gotten her pregnant. Fortunately, he realizes that he's in love with her and promises to spend the next 3 years on a farm for her. Just exactly what he's planning to do after that time is never really explained in the play. Such is the nature of desire. We've also seen plenty of romantic attraction and desire in other Shakespeare plays. There's Romeo and Juliet, Troilus and Cressida, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, not to mention Sir Andrew Aguecheek and Malvolio, who both desire Olivia in Twelfth Night, Nell the kitchen wench, who mistakenly goes after the wrong Dromio in the Comedy of Errors, Regan and Goneril, who both lust after Gloucester's illegitimate son Edmund in King Lear, Lord Angelo, who propositions the virtuous Isabella in Measure for Measure, Cloten, whose wooing is spurned by Inogen and Cymbeline, Bertram, who goes around deflowering virgins in Italy and is outwitted by Diana in All's Well That Ends Well. Arcite falls in love with Amelia, and the jailer's daughter falls in love with his cousin Palamon in The Two Noble Kinsmen. And Dr. Caius longs to marry Anne Page in The Merry Wives of Windsor, but grabs the wrong person in the dark and winds up with a boy. Still, some romantic attractions do wind up happily. There's Rosalind and Orlando, Celia and Oliver, and Audrey and Touchtone in As You Like It, Claudio and Hero, and Benedict and Beatrice wed at the end of Much Ado About Nothing, Portia and Bassanio, Graziano and Nerissa, and Jessica and Lorenzo all wind up happily ever after in The Merchant of Venice. Valentine not only gets Sylvia, but her wealthy father's blessing at the end of Two Gentlemen of Verona. Palamon marries Amelia at the completion of The Two Noble Kinsmen, and Miranda winds up with Ferdinand in The Tempest. Don't you just love a happy ending? One of the things I love most about Shakespeare is how he uses female unity to bind women, most notably when they are negotiating in the ways of love. In this play, we have 4 pairs of lovers, the Princess and King Ferdinand, Biron and Rosalind, Dumaine and Catherine, and Longueville and Maria. The nice thing about these 4 is that they're already paired off with each other. The women all know and support each other and make sure that they do not let the men play them as fools. And even though they all want to fall in love, none of them wants to be taken in by their lovers, and so they seek advice and support from one another. We see this over and over again in All's Well That Ends Well, with Helen getting help from Diana and her mother. In As You Like It, Rosalind and her cousin Celia are the best of friends, and each helps the other to win Orlando and Oliver. Isabel and Mariana band together to thwart Lord Angelo in Measure for Measure. Anne Boleyn has the old lady in Henry VIII. Juliet has the nurse to comfort her in Romeo and Juliet, and Desdemona has Amelia to confide in Othello. Cleopatra turns to Charmian and Isis for womanly support in Antony and Cleopatra, as do Volumnia and Virgilia in Coriolanus. Julia has her servant Lucetta in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and Portia turns to Nerissa in The Merchant of Venice. Adriana is comforted by her sister Luciana in The Comedy of Errors, and the 3 widowed queens console each other in The Two Noble Kinsmen. And let's not forget the female unity of Mistresses Page and Ford in The Merry Wives of Windsor. But still, Shakespeare did not leave out the camaraderie among his male characters either. On the contrary, he made sure that all of them got the help and support they needed when they pursued the women of their dreams. In Act 4, Scene 3, Biron urges the king, Longueville, and Dumaine to forsake their oath, saying, "Then fools you were, these women to forswear, or keeping what is sworn, you will prove fools. For wisdom's sake a word that all men love, or for love's sake a word that loves all men, or for men's sake the authors of these women, or women's sake by whom we men are men. Let us once lose our oaths to find ourselves, or else we lose ourselves to keep our oaths. It is religion to be thus forsworn, for charity itself fulfills the law, and who can sever love from charity? My favorite part of this scene is that all the men, regardless of status, recognize that Barone is the most experienced of the four when it comes to wooing women. Of course, that's a sliding scale, and so they heed his words when it comes to matters of the heart. We also see this camaraderie with Don Pedro, Claudio, and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing. Jaques counsels Touchstone in As You Like It. Dromio and Antipholus lean on each other in The Comedy of Errors, while Romeo joins forces with Mercutio and Benvolio in Romeo and Juliet. Pander does his best to help Troilus in Troilus and Cressida, and Speed does all he can to help Valentine in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Lorenzo is aided by Solario and Graziano, while Bassanio is assisted by Antonio, all in The Merchant of Venice. Sir Toby Belch encourages Sir Andrew Aguecheek in The Twelfth Night, and Master Page and Robert Shallow help Master Slender in The Merry Wives of Windsor. When we return, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in the play. Let's take a look at some of Shakespeare's most powerful lines in Love's Labour's Lost. In Act 4, Scene 1, Barone admits that he's in love with Rosalind, even though he's sworn an oath against seeing a woman and convinced himself that he would not fall in love. Here's a little of what he has to say in his soliloquy, which sounds very similar to Benedict's in Much Ado About Nothing. And I, forsooth, in love, I that have been love's whip, a very beetle to a humorous sigh, a critic, nay, a night-watched constable, a domineering pedant o'er the boy, than whom no mortal so magnificent, this wimpled, whining, purblind, wayward boy, this senior, junior, giant dwarf, Dan Cupid, regent of love rhymes, lord of folded arms, the anointed sovereign of sighs and groans, liege of all loiterers and malcontents, dread prince of plackets, king of codpieces, sole imperator, and great general of trotting parators, O my little heart, and I, to be a corporal of his field, and wear his colours like a tumbler's hoop. What, I love, I sue, I seek a wife, a woman that is like a German clock, still a repairing, ever out of frame and never going aright, being watched, that it may still go aright. Nay, to be perjured, which is worst of all, and among three, to love, the worst of all. And in Act 3, Scene 1, Don Armado has Castor deliver a love letter to Jacquinetta and gives him remuneration, which just means money paid for a service. But Castor doesn't understand the meaning and thinks it's a specific amount. Here's what he has to say. Now will I look to his remuneration. Remuneration. Oh, that's the Latin word for 3 farthings. 3 farthings. Remuneration. What's the price of this inkle? 1 penny. Now I'll give you a remuneration. Why, it carries it. Remuneration. Why, it is a farther name than French crown. I will never buy and sell out of this word. Just then Barone enters and asks Costard to deliver a letter for him to Rosalind. He says, "Oh, my good knave Costard, exceedingly well met." And Costard asks him, "Pray you, sir, how much carnation ribbon may a man buy for a remuneration?" Barone asks, "What is a remuneration?" Costard clarifies, "Marry, sir, halfpenny farthing." And Barone says, "Why then 3 farthing worth of silk." Costard replies, "I thank your worship, God be with you." But Barone says, "Stay, slave, I must employ thee. As thou wilt win my favour, good my knave, do one thing for me that I shall entreat." Costard asks him, "When would you have it done, sir?" And Barone says, "This afternoon." Costard said, "Well, I will do it, sir, fare you well." But Barone stops him, saying, "Thou knowest not what it is." Undaunted, Costard says, "I shall know it, sir, when I have done it." Barone grows impatient with him and says, "Why, villain, thou must know it first." Costard replies, "I will come to your worship tomorrow morning." But Barone explains, "It must be done this afternoon. Hark, slave, it is but this. The princess comes to hunt here in the park, and in her train there is a gentle lady. When tongues speak sweetly, then they name her name, and Rosalind they call her. Ask for her, and to her white hand see thou do commend this sealed-up counsel. There's thy guerdon. Go. Biron gives him a shilling. He leaves, and Costard examines the shilling, saying, Garden! Oh, sweet garden! Better than remuneration. 11 pence farthing better. My sweet garden. I will do it, sir, in print. Garden. Remuneration. When we get back, we'll look at some of the major turning points in Love's Labour's Lost and correlation to the other Shakespeare plays. One of the major turning points in the play is when the four men come to the conclusion that they will not be able to keep their oaths. This takes place in Act 4, Scene 3. But just before that happens, Biron is the last of the four students to be discovered in love. And just before Costard and Jaquenetta arrive with his letter, Biron hypocritically chastises his three friends for falling in love. When King Ferdinand asks him, Are we betrayed thus to thy overview? Biron responds saying, Not you to me, but I betrayed by you, I that am honest, I that hold it sin to break the vow I am engaged in. I am betrayed by keeping company with men like you, men of inconstancy. When shall you see me write a thing in rhyme, or groan for love, or spend a minute's time in pruning me? When shall you hear that I will praise a hand, a foot, a face, an eye, a gait, a state, a brow, a breast, a waist, a leg, a limb? Of course, at that moment, Costard and Jaquenetta burst in with Biron's love letter, and the jig is up. Naturally, when news arrives that the princess's father has died, that is a major turning point because it means that all four of the couples will now have to wait a year and a day in order to marry. Now, let's look at some of the correlations between Love's Labour's Lost and the other Shakespeare plays. Biron and Rosalind begin to flirt with and taunt each other as soon as they come into contact with one another. We know that they danced together once before in Brabant, and you can tell that they have some kind of chemistry, even if they don't want to admit it to themselves. This is very similar to Benedict and Beatrice's relationship in Much Ado About Nothing. According to the play, the punishment for getting Jaquenetta pregnant is 1 year in jail. In Measure for Measure, Claudio was sentenced to death for getting his fiancée Juliet pregnant. I guess when you look at it that way, a year in jail is not so bad. Marcadet arrives at the end of the play and in his very few lines announces that the King of France is dead. At the end of Hamlet, the ambassador from England arrives and succinctly announces that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. The dying king is described as decrepit, sick, and bedridden. This sounds like the description of old Norway in Hamlet, who is reportedly impotent and bedridden. Death overshadows a lot of the humor in this play, as it does in Twelfth Night, The Winter's Tale, Cymbeline, Measure for Measure, and The Comedy of Errors. We also have the wonderful use of go-betweens in this play, with Costard and Boyet doing most of the heavy lifting. We saw this with the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, with Mistress Quickly in The Merry Wives of Windsor, with Viola in Twelfth Night, with Julia in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, and with Pander in Troilus and Cressida. Don Armato describes himself as melancholy, just like Jaques in As You Like It, Hamlet, Pericles, Don John in Much Ado About Nothing, and Olivia and Orsino, both from Twelfth Night. And just like in A Midsummer Night's Dream and Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, we have groups of low characters contrasted with high characters, being defined as either intellectually advanced or of higher social status and nobility. When we return, we'll look at some interesting facts about Love's Labour's Lost. In preparing to do this episode, I came across some interesting facts I want to share with you. Navarre is a region in Spain that borders France, and Aquitaine is on France's southwestern border and includes the Bordeaux region. Costard is actually the name of a species of apple. Thus, the clown is really Mr. Applehead, which makes the fact that he breaks his shin while slipping on a plantain even funnier. The name Moat reflects the page boy's small size. That's why it's funny to have him playing Hercules in The Nine Worthies. Shakespeare also wrote another play entitled Love's Labour's Won, which may have been the sequel to this play. And while there are no known copies of the play itself, we know of its existence from two different historical accounts. The first mention of the play occurs in a 1598 list of plays by Francis Mears, which includes a dozen Shakespeare plays. In the list of Shakespearean comedies, it includes The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, Love's Labour's Won, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and The Merchant of Venice. In addition, in 1953, an August 1603 book list receipt belonging to bookseller Christopher Hunt was discovered, which lists the play in printed form along with several other well-known Shakespeare plays. Hopefully someday a printed copy will be discovered and we'll have just one more Shakespeare comedy to enjoy. And finally, one of the play's claim to fame is that it contains the longest word found in any Shakespeare play, and that would be the 13-syllable honorific abilitudinitanibus. It's a medieval Latin word that translates as the state of being able to achieve honors. It's mentioned by Costard in Act 5, Scene 1. Ironically, the simplest character in the play uses it to mock the snobby so-called intellectuals. Shakespeare used it only once. However, it's not included in either the 1985 BBC Shakespeare version or the 2000 Kenneth Branagh version of the play. By the way, at 27 letters, it's the longest word in the English language to strictly alternate between consonants and vowels. When we return, we'll look at some of the great actors that appear in the 1985 BBC Shakespeare version of Love's Labour's Lost. All right, now let's take a look at some of the remarkable actors who play in the 1985 BBC Shakespeare version of Love's Labour's Lost. The magnificent Mike Gwilym, who plays Barone, also played Tullus Aufidius in Coriolanus and Pericles in Pericles, Prince of Tyre, both in 1984. David Warner, who plays Don Adriano de Amato, also plays Chancellor Gorkon in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country in 1991, and Spicer Lovejoy in the blockbuster film Titanic in 1997. Frank Williams, who plays Anthony Dull, a constable, also played an officer in The Comedy of Errors in 1983. Clifford Rose, who plays Boyette, also played the Bishop of Carlisle in Richard II in 1979. Jay Rupardia, who plays Adrian, also played a Roman soldier in Coriolanus in 1984. John Burgess, who plays Sir Nathaniel, also played Sicinius Volutus in Coriolanus in 1984. Valentine Dyall, who plays Marcaday, also played Adrian in Coriolanus in 1984. Jeffrey Burridge, who plays Dumaine, also played Guiderius in Cymbeline in 1982. And finally, once again, Paul Jesson, who plays Costard, also played Clown in The Winter's Tale in 1981, Cloten in Cymbeline in 1982, multiple roles including the Duke of Clarence in Henry VI Parts 1, 2, 3, and in Richard III, all in 1983, and the first citizen in Coriolanus in 1984. That means that he has appeared, yes, in 8 different BBC Shakespeare plays, by my count more than any other actor in the entire series. But let's also take a look at the excellent cast of actors who appear in the 2000 Kenneth Branagh musical comedy version of Love's Labour's Lost, set against a World War II background. Kenneth Branagh directs the film and plays Barone. Alessandro Nivola, who plays the King of Navarre, also played Billy Brennan in Jurassic Park 3 in 2001. Alicia Silverstone, who plays the Princess of France, also played Batgirl in Batman and Robin in 1997. Adrian Lester, who plays Dumaine, also played Oliver Du Bois in Kenneth Branagh's 2006 version of As You Like It. Richard Briers, who plays Sir Nathaniel, also played in other Kenneth Branagh films as Malvolio in Twelfth Night in 1988, Bardolph in Henry V in 1989, Leonato in Much Ado About Nothing in 1983, and Polonius in Hamlet in 1996. Richard Clifford, who plays Boyette, also appeared in several other Kenneth Branagh films as Duke Charles of Orleans in Henry V in 1989, Conrad in Much Ado About Nothing in 1993, and LeBeau in As You Like It in 2006. Jimmy Ewell, who plays Constable Anthony Dull, also appears in other Kenneth Branagh films as Captain Jamie in Henry V in 1989, Friar Francis in Much Ado About Nothing in 1993, and Corin in As You Like It in 2006. Timothy Spall, who plays Don Adriano de Armado, also played Rosencrantz in Kenneth Branagh's version of Hamlet in 1996. Geraldine McEwen, who plays Holofernes, also played Alice in Kenneth Branagh's Henry V in 1989. And finally, Nathan Lane, who steals the show as Costard, also starred as Max Baileystock in the 1985 remake of Neil Simon's The Producers. And now, get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called, Is There a Doctor in the House? All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge, which is called, Is There a Doctor in the House? Name the plays in which these doctors or physicians appear. Number 1, Dr. Pinch. Number 2, Dr. Caius. And number 3, Lord Cerimon. When we get back, I'll have the answers for you, and we'll finish up with some relevant lessons from Love's Labour's Lost. Okay, let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge, which was called, Is There a Doctor in the House? You were to name the plays in which these doctors or physicians appear. Number 1, Dr. Pinch. He is in The Comedy of Errors. Number 2, Dr. Caius. That's a character from The Merry Wives of Windsor. And number 3, Lord Cerimon. He appears in Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Now, let's wrap up with some relevant lessons from Love's Labour's Lost. First, commit to your commitments. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Don Armado says that he will plow 3 years for Jacquinetta. That means that he's going to be a farmer. But what happens after 3 years? I would think that a woman expecting a baby would like a little bit more clarification from the father of her child. Number 2, when it comes to courtship, don't play games. As the men must learn the hard way, love is worth waiting for, especially from women who want to know that their husbands are going to be serious about their relationships. And finally, number 3, avoid giving in to peer pressure. Use your own mind. As motivational speaker Earl Nightingale once said, whatever the majority of people are doing under any given circumstances, if you do the exact opposite, you will probably never make another mistake as long as you live. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo on Shakespeare. Please join me next time when I'll tell you a story about ancient Rome that is both vengeful and gory.